So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and thank you all for being here. Peter and I thrilled. It's our first of the Karate Labs release webinars. Not that, and in 6 years, Karate has had enough and more releases, but this is our first as Karate Labs. Peter joins me in thanking all of you for taking time out from your busy schedules. We don't take it for granted, and we thank the community, the evangelists, our users, the enterprise users, for your continued support, the learnings, and it's great to have you all here. Before I pass it on to Peter, for him to cover the key features in the big 1.3.0 release, and also welcome John Keys, who will share a lot about his visual testing contribution. I just want to take a few minutes and paint the picture of who we stand for as Karate Labs and what our aspirations and vision is as a company. Open source is about trust, and trust is about transparency. And Peter, since the time he created Karate, and as we scale Karate Labs, transparency and trust are absolutely the foundation of what we build and run Karate Labs as. And if I paint the picture of the market landscape we are in today, Statistica says that today there are 26 million developers. And typically the thumb rule, we have seen that for every 4 developers, there is 1 QA professional. Software is going to undergo industrialization, which will lead to a huge spurt in autonomous software development, which means we anticipate this ratio to change. For every 2 developers, there will be 1 QA professional needed. But if you bring it back to right here, right now, Indeed.com today has 20,000 QA jobs available in the United States alone. That means enterprises not only need to fill in these positions, they also need to onboard the QA professionals to the tool landscape they have in their respective environments. So how do they do that while the demand for both developers and QA professionals is going to far outstrip the supply? So let's look at the tool landscape for a moment. If you look at the tool landscape, it is made up of some fantastic companies out there with some amazing tools that they bring to market. And each of them is a leader in their own capacity. And while we compete with some, we also coexist with many, okay? But what the market needs today to cater to this demand is for one tool to be able to do more. And this is where we take pride in what Karate is about. Thanks to Peter, the contributors, the community, the users, Karate has grown organically. And we have every aspiration and intent to continue building these capabilities organically. If you see the 2 columns in gray, we are giving you a teaser into our product roadmap that is to come in 2023 and 2024. We are going to get into API documentation. We are going to get into test management, test case management, test coverage, API coverage, and all of this will be organic. In the last 15 months, we have seen many enterprises onboard Karate from other closed source software with the primary intent of using Karate for API testing, API performance testing, and UI testing all in one solution. But for a moment, forget Karate, forget all these tools. When customers reach out to us to onboard Karate, the first question we ask them is, where do they benchmark themselves in this test automation capability map? Where do they see themselves fitting in this? Because it's not just about a tool. It is about the vision of these organizations and teams when it comes to test automation. And what this means is, for us at Karate, all the blue boxes today are capabilities that are already in Karate open source. And some of the gray boxes with the functionality and features are part of our roadmap. And you will see more and more as we go along. Like I said, Karate Labs will always be transparent. If I take all these capabilities in this capability map and hone it down into what it means for Karate's top differentiators, we are the only open source company in the market that unifies API testing, API mocks, API performance, and UI testing. And what does that mean in terms of top differentiators? I'll double click on a few. The beauty of Karate is it appeals to developers, it appeals to non-programmers, it also appeals to product owners. Why? because it helps developers with their productivity. It makes QA professionals do their job much faster without having to learn different programming languages. In a nutshell, it enables enterprises passionate about user experience where APIs are a core differentiator for their business, ensure their end-to-end testing simulates end user workflows accurately. So you would ask, okay, all this is great, but what has that brought Karate Labs to today? These top differentiators have enabled us to have these fantastic marquee companies, irrespective of their size or scale, believe in karate and scale karate. In the last 14 months since Peter and I got together, and by the way, Peter and I have known each other for 16 years, and I'm thrilled that he invited me to be part of this journey. In the last 14 months, we have met with all these companies, either in person or virtually. And it's been thrilling to see how they have scaled the adoption of karate and believing in our vision and our roadmap. We are also getting these customers to come out in the open and talk about their use of karate. For example, we did a webinar with SAP on the 15th of September. We have a webinar happening with FIS Global on the 1st of December. We have Oracle having a webinar with us on the 19th of Jan 2023. Our most recent acquisition, Charter Communications, a Fortune 500 company, has onboarded karate after moving away from a closed source software. Okay, all this is great. The key message from this is, please keep sharing with us. We are hungry to learn. We don't have all the answers. And every day there are new companies that reach out to us saying, hey, Karate Labs, I've been using karate for the last few years. I want to talk to you guys. Please reach out to us. We are not ramping up a sales team. We are not ramping up a marketing team, purely focused on product and user interaction. Now, where do we go from here? When Peter created karate, the main premise was test automation made simple. That is going to remain our premise and our foundation. And we want to take that simplicity and the power of test automation with karate to the next level. And what does that mean? We have bundled the power of karate and delivering it as an IDE plugin. And it is out in IntelliJ, it's out in Visual Studio Code extension. And the best part is our plugins are future ready. You can use it right here, right now in remote development environments like GitHub Codespaces, Gitpod, GitLab. Most important reason why we put the power of karate into the plugins is to drive adoption within teams, retention within teams, and expansion within teams. Today, we have teams of 20 in companies and teams of 200 that are using karate. And the logos that you saw, there is so much more work that we need to do as karate. So in a nutshell, I'll summarize by saying, please share with us, please reach out to us. The avenues for you to reach out to us are enough and more. We have presence on social media and we are doing much more. If you all think we have earned your respect, please go give us a GitHub star if you haven't done so already, and reach out to us to share your best practices. And with that, Peter, I pass the baton on to you, man.
Thank you, Kapil. Great. I will start sharing. Thank you all, and I'll get straight into it. I know all of you are here to understand the new features and the release that actually went out a couple of weeks ago. But here we are actually to just deep dive into some of the key features to tell you what to expect and also give you a flavor of what you can expect in the future. And we have been busy, right? In fact, Kapil talked about our journey at Karate Labs, and it's been a really fun 1 year looking back. And what I'm showing you is the GitHub commit timeline over the last 1 year, specifically on the right. After we incorporated Karate Labs and I and Kapil actually went full-time into this, you can see that we haven't let up. There's been a significant activity with the help of you all, the community and contributors specifically, and we will talk more about contributors. You can see that over the last 1 year, we have actually churned out quite a lot of capabilities, more innovation, and this is certainly going to continue. And let me, for a moment, in fact, let me just get straight into the release notes. And I think a lot of you are familiar with the release notes whenever we make a release, and our release cycle is averaging around 6 months as of now, which has been a pretty steady, consistent rhythm. And all of you old timers would probably know that we have this approach of releasing RC versions. So you wouldn't be left behind whenever there are significant, bug fixes or new capabilities. We kind of release them so that you can download them or acquire the libraries and dependencies via Maven and Gradle. Even though our like formal 1.x.o releases are approximately every 6 months. So I'm looking at the release notes for 1.3.0. And what I'm going to do is actually just walk through all of these, deep dive into some with demos. And yeah, right here at the top, you have visual validation. This is like the highlight of this release. I know all of you are waiting to hear more about this, but I have John, one of our key contributors, is on the call, who would actually deep dive into this about 10 or 15 minutes from now. So hang on for that. We'll save the best for the last. Okay. So here we are. I'm going to zoom in on to some of the key things that we called out in the release notes. Those of you who have been using Karate extensively in an enterprise context, especially doing a lot of parallel tests, some of you may be aware that fortunately, only when you hit edge cases and you're really doing a lot of stuff in parallel, and you had a lot of JavaScript mixed into your test scripts, there were some issues. Those are all solved. We actually, behind the scenes, some of you would know that the JavaScript engine we are using is something called Graal. We are in the latest and greatest, which means that things work fine. You can kind of freely use functions all over the place. What I'm doing now is actually switching to Visual Studio Code and just showing you some of the implications of the new JavaScript engine. Some of you know this, but just a reminder that ECMAScript 6, or the latest and greatest of JavaScript syntax, most notably what I'm highlighting here, the JavaScript anonymous nameless functions, or the arrow function option, is now very convenient. So the moment you define an array which is in this before variable, you can actually on that variable call all the JavaScript array functions such as map and filter. And I'm just calling out filter because it's actually one of my favorite JavaScript things to do in Karate, because a lot of you would probably have used JSON path to do filter operations on large JSON arrays. But I've found over the years that actually doing a JavaScript filter operation on an array, especially complex arrays, and when you have complex find conditions or filter conditions, I find this approach easier. So if I actually run this demo from Visual Studio Code, you can see that the first example is actually doing a multiplication, a squaring of these three numbers. So you indeed got 1, 4, and 9 back. And the second example is actually filtering out only those elements in the array where the value of A is greater than 2. And as expected, we get back 3 and 4. So that's about JavaScript. There's lots more, but JavaScript functions, your takeaways are you can use them more in Karate tests, especially when you do parallel execution. And you can actually start using the latest and greatest JavaScript syntax, especially the arrow notation of functions. This actually means a lot of you would be familiar from the early days of Karate, right? The only way to write a JavaScript function was like you had to type out that whole keyword function, round brackets and then curly brackets. But now things are a lot more cleaner with the option of using the proper, the JavaScript arrow operator. All right. So that's about JavaScript. Switching back to the release notes, let me spend some time on the new Karate.response API. Now, most of you wouldn't need this, but there's one particular edge case or use case that actually required this to be added to Karate, which is that when you are trying to get headers out of a response, an HTTP response, Karate wasn't really good at taking care of the case sensitivity of the header. This was a kind of a learning for me as well, which in the HTTP specification, the case of the headers does not matter. Anyway, to make this clear, let me show you an example. I have, there you go. What I'm going to do in this test is make one simple GET request to this URL over the internet. And we are actually going to use the new API, which is karate.response. And then you have a whole lot of options. You can get a header by name. You can get all the header values for a particular named header. You can get the request parameters, get the body as bytes, get the response length, get the time it took for the whole request and response to actually happen, so on. There's a whole bunch there, but I'm just going to show you this example of getting a header out of the response and not caring about the case. So running this example, it's going to the internet. Yeah, we have some pretty, and you can see I'm looking for this header, and you can see the content type header is actually camel case. The C and the T are uppercase. But we were able to actually say get content type. We just put it all as lowercase to be just consistent and not really worrying about case sensitivity. And we were able to match that it actually was application JSON. And I'm just showing an example of the other APIs where we can actually print out all the headers. So this new API is mostly not required for the average user of karate, but when you actually want to take something that you got back as a response and do more heavy lifting with it. If you write custom frameworks around karate, which you normally don't need to do, but yes, there are use cases where teams do that. You may want to actually try this API. So there's also a little more in the release notes that says that in karate mocks, these can be helpful. They make things even more easier, like request routing. So just watch out for that as well. The new option to write mocks in JavaScript. This is kind of a big one, and there's actually an extra page of wiki documentation that goes into details. But I'll just call out the reasons this was introduced and what it means to you. For most teams, this is, for all teams, this is just an additional option. It's not something you need to use unless you feel it really is relevant and it actually makes some of the things you want to do easier. Short summary of what this is that you can write mocks in JavaScript. All of you today, longtime users of karate, know that this is how you used to write mocks, right? The stuff I have in the center of the screen, which is kind of a misuse of Gherkin or how Cucumber syntax is. But honestly, there are teams that love this. Why? Because it just makes it easy to read. There's so many. In fact, the what do you say? The lack of flexibility or the very straight jacketed way that karate makes you do things is kind of a good thing, because your tests read from top to bottom. You know exactly where to see your request handlers and all that. But actually, what I'm showing you now is side by side. You can actually see the old style of karate mocks, which is still going to be there and supported for the near or the long-term future. But the new way of writing mocks is on the right. We've got some annotations showing you some of the key features. Like, for example, there is a introduction of something called a session. Those of you who have written web applications would immediately understand what this means. But the interesting thing about a session is that it is actually available to any other mock that you might have. And then you can actually split your mock functionality into multiple JavaScript files. So you can have, for example, here payments.js is just handling /API/payments. If you had another JavaScript, it would handle another resource path, so on. So you see the difference, right? On the right, you see, okay, now you're in pure JavaScript. You have the whole flexibility and latitude to use if then. You can actually implement some very complex business logic. You can deep dive call karate APIs to do matching and validation if you really wanted to. This has been a request from some teams that are pushing the boundaries of karate mocks. They want to actually do request payload validation. So that's something very easily you can do. So I'll leave you to read the documentation, and there's a whole bunch. Again, what you expect from karate's documentation is that we put a lot of effort into our documentation. And for those of you who really want to go into some advanced topics, there is a talk of how you can actually use this new JavaScript way of writing mocks to actually do things with Open API and Swagger. So if that's something that interests you, you could go and look at that and of course ask us questions. That reminds me, one of the things we are doing in the future in our plugins is to support importing of Postman collections. So just stay tuned for that in case that is of interest to you. The contains only deep, right? So yeah, this thanks to Eric Driggs of Disney actually, who prompted us to do this. So I'm showing you this one example, which actually would fail if I run this test, because one array in the JSON is out of order. This is going to fail. And forever, ever since Karate was created, we used to treat arrays as the order matters. But we've got this request once in a while that sometimes you just want to validate the JSON. Some arrays may be shuffled. We don't care. We just want to do the whole assertion. And those of you longtime users of Karate know that this is a pretty, this may require you in Karate to write 2 or 3 sub-steps, split the JSON, extract only parts of the JSON, and then perform the assertion. So what I'm going to do is show you that contains only deep would work for that. I'm just going to switch to the latest version of the Karate mock, run it using Maven, and there we see it works. By the way, one of the nice things about the official Karate plugin is that one click actually takes you into the report. So that's about that. I won't demo this, but I'll just talk through this. Some teams have said, you know what, when there's an environment failure and you start running this massive suite that maybe takes 15 minutes and everything fails, right? But Karate by default, it tries to run every single scenario and test that you have as part of your test suite. And some teams have requested, you know what, at the start, we want to do this one environment check, just see whether our server is healthy. And then if it is not healthy, that's just abort. So now you have the flexibility to do that. There's an extra configure setting that gives you a way to actually say, okay, the moment you hit one error in a Karate test, any Karate test, just stop everything. So that works. And one suggestion is that you can actually combine this with your use of, what's it called? Call single. A lot of you would know that call single is Karate's recommended way of doing things like a single sign-on authentication, get all your tokens and secrets in place at the start of your test suite, and then kick off your parallel threads so that you can run your tests very fast. So that's about that. And now we come to the most important change, and now we're getting to breaking changes. And yeah, breaking changes means that some of your existing tests would not work. This is obviously something we take very seriously as Karate Labs, that we try to not do this as far as possible, but this is a use case that went through a lot of discussion. There's actually an issue here. You can go and read the details there later if you really want to know the details, but I can summarize what this means. And what this means is, one way to put this is that this makes data-driven testing a lot easier in Karate. It makes looping over data easy. And I'll show you an example in a moment. And some of you would know that in Karate, there was something called, there is something called the dynamic scenario outline, where in Cucumber, when you have a table of examples, yes, if you have a table with rows, everything is good. Each row would be converted at runtime to a particular scenario. And that's how you can do, first level data-driven testing. Karate has, for the last 2 or 3 years, had this interesting option where you could, instead of having a hard-coded table of data, you could actually say, okay, this table is going to be generated by a JSON file or a CSV file and so on. Okay. And what we did to make it easier for you to set up that data was we said, okay, you can use the background, and in the background, you could call the CSV file and then kick off your scenario outline. And we have this interesting, what I'm highlighting here, line number 18. This is the way in which you can actually pass a data source into examples, and then everything just happens like normal. Each row in that data source is converted to a scenario at runtime. And that's how a scenario outline works. I think you can already see the before and after. We have introduced a new tag. It's called @setup here on line number 4 on the right. And I'm actually showing you right here, the simple change you need to do for your existing test. So those of you out there who are using Karate and you have used a dynamic scenario outline where you have examples with just one cell, and that cell is a data source, it's either a JSON array or a function that returns a JSON array, you will need to, and if you were using a background to set up that data source, which is kittens here on the left, you need to now convert that background to a scenario, put a @setup annotation. So @setup, the setup annotation is now built into Karate. It's one of those special magic annotations that's baked in. And one interesting aspect of the setup annotation is that it will not run at all by default, right? It is only there, and the only way that you can get this scenario on line number 5 here to run is by calling a new API called karate.setup. And after you run that scenario, you have a bunch of variables. You, in fact, could have multiple variables being instantiated. And what you can do is you can actually pick out one of those variables, the variable that you have deposited your entire data source, which should be a JSON array. You just need to end up with the JSON array, and then everything is fine. So I know this may be hard to understand at first, because this is one of the most, advanced things of Karate that allows you to create, one way you can look at, you can think of this option in Karate, the dynamic scenario outline, is that you can actually generate test cases on the fly. In the future, we expect this actually to be quite useful for things like API security testing. So again, as Kapil said at the start of the call, if you have some ideas, we want to bounce off some thoughts with us, or if you have some, options of actually mixing Karate with some data generation routines that would cover the kinds of extreme testing that you have in mind, please do, reach out to us. So just to do a demo, I have a scenario here. I have this new tag set up. So we know that that scenario will not run unless called by a .setup. And if I run this, what I expect is that we print each row, underscore row that I've highlighted here is one of those few magic variables in Karate for convenience. And it should basically print out each of the values in the data source array when you run this test. So we're running this test. And as expected, we got 3 rows printed to the console, A1, A2, and A3. Why, to finally hopefully make it super clear as to why we made this change, it's because people want to do some very complex logic before massaging things and getting the data that they need for that data source, that JSON array that we keep talking about. So here's an example where actually in the setup, we actually call an API. We're going to get a bunch of results back as a JSON array. And each item in the array is actually going to be looped over, and the scenario outlines would be created. And I think all of you know, one of the key advantages of a scenario outline. So here we are, we actually got back a whole bunch of, we got 10 rows back, and we have printed out each row. And as I was saying, the super helpful consequence of using a proper scenario outline is that you get this very nice report. Each row of the data source iteration is converted into a separate scenario. So the report looks especially good. This gives you a lot of, options to really make your report make sense to someone who's looking at your test results, especially someone who's a non-programmer or a product owner or business analyst. You can see, oh, these are the scenarios that we actually covered. And you can do things like boundary conditions and edge cases, all neatly structured if you create your data source the right way. All right, so that was the breaking change that you need to watch out for. There are a couple of other breaking changes which I will not go into detail. You can just read about it. The reason I'm not going into detail is because I know for a fact this would be maybe 3 to 5% of karate users. So a majority of you would only need to worry about the setup annotation if you have used a background. Again, to repeat, if you used a background for a dynamic scenario outline, you need to change that to a scenario with a setup. That's the thing you need to watch out for when you upgrade from old versions of karate to 1.3.0. And yeah, I need to talk about this heads up before I pass it on to John in a moment. But 1.3.0 will be the last release of karate that allows for usage of Java 8. And from 1.4 onwards, we will be Java 11 onwards only. I think it's the right time. And so and of course, if you have some concerns about this, do reach us to us. There's actually an issue here that I will just bring up. And I also want to highlight that we got some reports that 1.3.0 of karate for some enterprises, they had some very paranoid, extreme security checks, and we found that some of the libraries that karate uses were flagged as vulnerable. So we actually expedited a release. So for those of you who actually see any problems with 1.3.0, I'm sure this would be a very small minority of all of you. The good news is that we already have an early version of 1.4.0 out. It's available on Maven Central. If you, so yeah, this should do try it if this applies to you, which is you have some extreme security constraints at your workplace, and keep in mind that one of the things I do want to mention here is that when we run any build in karate, we actually make sure that we actually run two builds. We run a build on Java 18. And the reason I'm showing you this is just to give you a little bit of confidence that, we are keeping track of the evolution of the JDK. So you can rest assured that, the code base of karate is kind of set up to be living on as open source, obviously, for the next, 5 to 10 years, I would go so far to say. So that was a lot. And shout out to all the contributors. You can see a few of the contributors, including a bot over here, the Dependa bot, which is a good thing, because what that means is that we're actually getting, GitHub is pretty good nowadays at telling us that we have security violations that you need to address, and it helpfully creates a pull request. So we accept that pull request, and that bot turns up to be one of the top contributors. We're looking for more contributors, and of course, shout out to John Keys here at the end, number 8, who is one of our new contributors. We're going to hear from him in a moment. He's actually been kind enough to contribute the visual testing piece. Shout out to new contributors. We have a few new contributors in this particular release. So you see the names or GitHub handles at the bottom. And one reminder here, there's more of, me stepping up a level and telling you all that, okay, these are all the things in karate. Some of you may have perceived karate as just an API testing tool. It's not. It does API mocks and web browser automation. We have very good WebDriver support and CDP, Chrome, Puppeteer style support. What we added in this release is this that I'm highlighting here: visual validation or visual testing. So we're kind of excited with that, and hearing from all of you trying this out, because this is something people have wanted for a long time. Let me hand it off in a moment to John. I will introduce him. John is CTO of Thought Foundry, super experienced in the industry, has been working in the whole worrying about testing and manual testing since the 90s. And I will hand it over to John to talk more about why he actually contributed this key piece, and the motivations, and how it helps him, and how he found karate, and so on. So with that, John, over to you.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Hopefully you can see my screen here. So I'm John, and thanks for inviting me, Peter and Kapil. Yeah, we found karate, I think about 2 years ago at Thought Foundry, and we came to it as a solution to testing our APIs, and we right away like fell in love with it, and it's open source, it's great. Peter's great answering questions. We just had a really good experience. And so when we decided to start doing some visual testing, browser testing, we thought, hey, karate can do this too. We should actually try this out, and it works great, and we're really pleased with it. And so, we started to get a little more advanced, and we started capturing some screenshots, and we were trying to figure out, what's the best way to do this, to make sure that we're delivering the best application that we can do and not having regressions and this type of thing. And so we tried a few commercial solutions. So I mentioned, I'm showing here the issue where we first brought this up to the karate team, and we were actually pretty happy with some of the commercial solutions, but they weren't perfect. And so we decided, let's see if we can find something else. And so we found some open source solutions that were actually really great as well. And we limped along. I'll say limped along. We used some open source software, specifically this one called Miku, with some success. And we used it for several months, and we started running into some problems. And so I've outlined the problems here in the ticket. And really the biggest thing for us was when we wanted to do a feature branch, add a new feature right away, our tests started failing. Until we could, get that new feature imported into the system as the new baseline, and then the tests start passing. And so there's a lot of friction there. And so we tried various ways to work around this, and finally, we have so many tests, and we're having so many problems. We decided we have to do something about this. And so we started looking for solutions where we could run the visual comparison locally. And it turned out that there wasn't a lot of great options. There's a few, and a lot of them were very inspiring. Miku, especially, we borrowed a lot of ideas from Miku. There's another one from American Express. It's like the Jest image comparison, I think. And so, long story short, we compiled a lot of different open source projects and code, and effectively added this feature directly to karate. And so in this way, we were solving a lot of our own problems. And, basically we're now running our image comparison locally right away as soon as we take the screenshot. And so we get instant feedback. And because it's written in pure Java, it's very fast, and we can fail the test right away if there's a problem. And so this is all really great. And the things that we've built really are built on a lot of open source projects, and so we kind of just glued it all together and integrated it, hopefully in a nice way, in karate. And so we had a lot of success with this, and we thought, hey, we're getting so much value from karate, open source, it's free. Peter is like basically supporting us. We should contribute this back, and as you can see here, Peter very graciously accepted that they would host this feature and work with us. And so we were really pleased that it was able to be included in the latest release, and really hopeful that other people get some value out of it as well, because we put some work into this, and we're happy to continue to support it. And if there is feedback, we'd love to hear it as well, because we can improve our process right along with everyone else. So I think probably the best way to look at this is to just dive into some code and look at a demo. So when we released this, we actually did record a video. So you can go back and look at that video. But we kind of created a contrived demo here to walk you through starting from zero. When you start taking some screenshots, basically what you want to do is establish a baseline. And so when you have your application working, you know it's correct, you capture that screenshot and save it somewhere, save it locally. And then so, every time you run the test afterward, you're comparing against that baseline to make sure that the latest code or the latest changes are still correct according or comparing against the baseline. And so this is all great, and we have some flexible features here. I won't go through everything, but I'll just show off a few of these where you can customize the behavior of the screenshot and do some configuration. And for today, I've added a few more features that are a little more realistic, a little more advanced, perhaps. And this is really when we get to the number 7 here, the API usage. This is how we're using the feature internally, and we're very successful with this. And so yeah, let's dive in here. So we're looking here at sort of a very basic test where we're going to capture some screenshots. We have this is our demo app that we're capturing screenshots from. You can see there's some dynamic behavior here. So let me move that down. So it's kind of loading, animations are happening. So this could be a challenge, really. But if we run the test, we'll capture some screenshots here. And then in the report, what we have is actually a diff UI. And so the diff UI, the first time, it's just showing you like, well, there is no changes because you just have one screenshot and you haven't actually recorded a baseline. So there's a little error message here telling you there was no baseline, so there's nothing to compare it against. But if you click this rebase, you can actually save it. And so now, when you come back, you can see that we've specified a baseline. And so when we take this screenshot, we'll compare it against the baseline. And so if we run the test again, and then come back up here, now we actually do have a baseline, and the latest is a little bit different. Hopefully you can see this. And so it's a little bit different, and the difference here is highlighted in pink. And so the purpose of this diff UI really is to just help you see the differences and understand what has changed. And so there's a lot of different options here. You can see we've said your baseline is 2 different, and you can configure this as well. There's a threshold. Usually like 0.1% or 0.2% we find is the right amount, but by default it's 0. So any change at all is going to trigger a failure. And so sometimes it's tough to see the difference. And so really that's what all these controls are for, is to help you visualize the difference. Change the colors a little bit. You can make the image transparent so that the differences stand out a little bit more. There's a few of these, and a lot of this UI comes directly from Resemble.js, which is super great. And so we're really using it almost unmodified. And so you can kind of play with some of these to get a better feel. My personal favorite is this one where you just see the difference and nothing else. And so it's very obvious, like something in the spinner has changed. And so basically, what we want to do here is use these controls to identify the differences and incorporate that back into our test. So, sorry, the zoom controls are hovering over a little bit. So this is great. Let's rebase. So we have our latest. We'll rebase. We'll save, and we kind of see a problem here, which is that although we have 2 screenshots, they're both being saved with the same name. And that's just like the default behavior. And so one of the things that you can customize is, the rebase behavior. And so you can see here we have this on show rebase handler, and that actually gets executed in the browser at runtime. And so what you do is you can pass in a handler function, and you get access to the configuration, and then you have this save as function. And so we can effectively customize the file name that's going to be saved. So if we run this version, great, and then we'll come back up here. And so once again, you'll see, we have some problems here. So we're looking on the left-hand side, you have the baseline, and on the right-hand side, you have the latest. And so the left-hand side is clearly wrong here. So we do want to rebase. So let's do that. And now you see we have a custom file name loading. So we'll do that, and we'll do it here as well. And now this one has a file name of loaded, which is great. We solved that problem. So this is pretty cool, but obviously you have to specify this function over and over and over again. So it's better if you actually just do it in one place. And so to make this work, we're actually going to use this configuration that gets passed in for each image comparison. And we'll just give it a name, and then we'll save the file as the name. And so when we run this, come back up here. Things seem to be working. We'll rebase again, loading. Yep. Okay, cool. So at this point, we're comparing the loading, the actual latest baseline for each individual test, and things are going well, but we do have some slight differences. And so in this contrived demo, basically, we've set it up so that it's a little bit different every time. So the loading spinner's in a slightly different state, maybe the logo animation's slightly further along. And so there's a couple ways you could handle this. You could just hide the elements, and that way it doesn't affect your screenshot. But obviously things start reflowing, and this could be problematic. And so another way to do this would be to just ignore certain parts of the application so that they never cause a failure, basically. And so that's what we've done here. We've specified for each of the images that we have an ignored area. And so if we run this, come back up to the summary. And so now, let me make this a bit bigger. So now you can see, hopefully, there's a little blue box around our loading animation, and you can actually control this directly in the diff UI in your browser. And so the way that you create these is with the mouse. You just right click, and then you can kind of move this box around, resize it a little bit. Once you're happy, you can lock it in place. And then when you click on the show config, you'll see basically this is the definition of that ignored boxes that we have back in the test. And so it's very flexible. It works out pretty well. And yeah, you can always come back in and edit this as well. So if something has changed, you can add more boxes, ignore different things, delete things, and you have a lot of flexibility there. And so we've done the same thing down here for the loaded image. We're ignoring this logo animation. So that's kind of where we stopped in the original demo, and I just wanted to take it a little bit further today. And so, kind of building off of what Peter mentioned earlier, you may, and in fact, you probably want to test on a lot of different browsers. And so, we've created this scenario outline where we're going to emulate more than one browser using a single scenario. And so in this case, what we've set up here, we have a phone and we have a tablet, and we're gonna test them using the scenario outline. And so this does kind of expose some problems here. You may see them already. What we have is like the ignored box is defined inline, but the device is going to be a little bit different. And so that ignored box probably is not going to work. So again, you have a few options. You could just hide the things that are dynamic. Maybe if you know the device dimensions, you could scale it, do some math, but it makes your test a little complicated. And also, you'll see here that we're using a dynamic name to include the device type. And so the reason for this is obviously, same thing. We don't want to be overriding the baseline images. And so you kind of have to know that this is the tablet loaded image, or this is the phone loaded image. And so if we run this, we will run into a few problems. And this is expected. And let's look at the result here. So here we have the phone. So we have two responses here, or two results, I should say. And so the first one's working well. The phone is still valid because that was our original test. But now if you look at the tablet, it's a little bit different, and this ignored box is in the wrong spot. And so this is not great. This is not exactly what we wanted. And so to solve some of these issues, we also created the JavaScript API. So this just gives you a lot of flexibility. And this is really how we use it internally at Thought Foundry. And so it's able to go a little bit further, and I'll put all this code online as well, so that you guys can review this and maybe use some of it in your projects as well. But basically what we've done here, I won't walk through all of this. The first time you run the test, if there is no baseline, we'll just copy it right away. So it saves you a few clicks. You don't have to go through, especially if you have a lot of tests, manually clicking rebase over and over and over. It's a little bit tedious. So this will automatically copy your baseline if one doesn't exist. It'll actually read off of the file system right here to dynamically pull in the configuration. And so if you have a named path, like your loaded tablet, loaded phone, you can have a loaded tablet.json or a loaded phone.json. And so you can have different configurations for every named image comparison that you're doing, and just store everything directly on the file system. So this is great. And one more thing that we've done, we've customized the on-show rebase and on-show config, and I'll demo this in just a second. But this makes it a little bit easier, again, so that you're not managing everything directly from the browser. What you'll see here is basically these are commands that you can just copy paste into your terminal, and it'll automatically copy files to the right place. And so it's very flexible. You can customize all of this if you're using Windows and PowerShell, or if you're on Mac or Linux, might want slightly different behavior. If your files live on a NAS or a SAN or some file share, you can customize all of this. And so what it ends up with is we have one reusable function that we've called screen grab. And now your test is very simple. So we're going to emulate our browser. We're going to do a screen grab with a named image comparison here, and that's it. And so if we run this test, actually before I do it, I'll get rid of all the existing screenshots. And so what you'll see here is in the screenshots, it's automatically copied everything over, which is great. And in the summary, what happens is in our screen grab, we've added the image comparison diff UI. And so now when you specify an ignored area and show config, something slightly different shows up. And so this is a command. This is what we use internally. And so when you copy this and then paste it into your terminal, you can see it's basically going to put on the file system this this JSON file, and it'll put it into the config. And next time you run the test, it'll just pull that JSON file in dynamically. And similarly, when you rebase, instead of downloading the file, now what you're seeing is a command that you can copy paste. So you copy this into your terminal, and it's going to copy the file that we've written into the temp directory into the location where we want the baseline. And so it's a little bit more flexible, and it just provides a little more ease of use when you're using the JavaScript API. And again, I know this is kind of a lot, so I'll put all of this online, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. But yeah, that's the gist. That's the image comparison feature. We're getting a lot of use out of it. Hope it benefits everyone else, and happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thanks so much, John. Much appreciated. I think if this, we'll wait for feedback, John. If this warrants a further more deep dive, because it's such a big feature, we'll have maybe a follow-on very focused session on this along with you.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
That's it. We are on time. On behalf of Peter, myself, and the growing Karate Labs team, thank you all very much. Like we said, we are hungry to learn. Please send us an email to share your best practices, or if you want to talk to us on founders@karatelabs.io. And if you think we have earned your respect, give us a GitHub star, and please follow us on LinkedIn. We're not throwing money away on big marketing initiatives. LinkedIn is the main forum for updates from Karate Labs. Twitter, now we are reactivating Meetup. YouTube has gone through a playlist now, which you will see, and we'll keep building on that. So that's it, Peter. We can stay online if there are any questions, but thank you all very, very much. Thanks a lot, John, and to all our contributors.